Welcome to this presentation of Merz Verlag of Spiel International channel, and I have a very special guest with me here. He's been called the patient number 0 of British gaming once, and he has been the founder of Games Workshop. He has been editor of White Dwarf magazine. He has been the author of numerous books of the fighting fantasy series. Yeah. He is he's the man who brought Lara Croft to Eidos Interactive, and he spent a lifetime in the gaming industry, either board game, either video gaming. Please welcome Ian Livingstone.
Good morning. How are you out there? Yes, life for me has been one big game, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. Work and play is the same for me.
I have, when I was preparing for this interview, and I'm most honored to have you here, I became aware that you have been a companion of my life for all my life. When I started in my teens, I started to read fighting fantasy. I played Dungeons and Dragons as a 13-year-old in the early 80s. You were the guy who brought Dungeons and Dragons to Great Britain.
Well, I'm delighted that you've enjoyed some of the things I've enjoyed putting into the world, and it's been a great pleasure. In fact, I meet more and more people of your age that say, "Oh, I used to read your books, or I used to play your games." And
for the younger viewers, we can show up. This is Scorpion Swamp. It's my original copy from 1984.
Yeah.
I will ask you to sign it later, please.
Sure.
What memories does that have for you?
Well, it's just extraordinary that these books have survived the test of time. They were the very first branching narrative books with a game system attached to them. There were obviously choose your own adventure books out there, but we wanted to have a game system because we'd been playing Dungeons and Dragons since the 1970s. And so we proposed this idea to Puffin Books because the editor, Geraldine Cook, came to our games day and said, "What are all these people doing?" And I said, "Well, they're playing Dungeons and Dragons." And Steve Jackson and I took her around, and she was bemused by it. So she said, "Could you write a book about this hobby of role-playing games?" And we said, "Well, rather than writing a book about the hobby, why don't you allow us to give you a book that gives you to experience that hobby?" And so she said, "Great idea." So Steve and I ran off back thinking, how are we going to do this? And so we worked on this manuscript called The Magic Quest, which became The Warlock of Firetop Mountain, Der Hexenmeister von Flammendenberg.
Yes.
And it was published just over a year later. Even though the management of Penguin Books thought it was a ridiculous idea, nobody would want to read interactive books.
How many copies did you sell?
20 million.
No one. It was. It's like the Beatle moment
a new one
of
just
Penguin.
come out as well.
This one, which can you show us?
This is called Assassins of Valencia. This is the hardback edition. It's published by Scholastic in the UK as a softback, but this is the hardback edition.
It stood the test of time.
It has. It's great. I mean, people, even though we've had video games and other formats of reading, the interactivity really is so engaging as a book. And there's been a revival in books and a revival in fighting fantasy, I'm delighted to say.
You started out as a flatmate with Steve Jackson.
There were 3 of us.
Yeah.
Steve Jackson, John Peake, and I. We all went to school in Altrincham in Cheshire in the UK, and we all went our separate ways to universities and colleges, and when we met back in London, our hobby was playing games. I used to play chess for the school and played lots of Monopoly, and we used to play. We had really badly paid jobs, and we thought, how can we turn our hobby so we stayed in and played games all the time, and so we loved it so much. How can we possibly turn our hobby of playing games into some sort of business? So we decided.
And you played with toy soldiers, with metal miniatures.
Yeah.
Do you still have your Macedonian
armies? Yeah, my Cretan archers. Yeah, you know more about it than I do. But mainly board games.
All right.
And so he wrote this newsletter and we sent them out to everybody we knew in games. And one of the copies found its way into the hands of Gary Gygax in Wisconsin. And he wrote to us, said, "Love your magazine. Here's this new game I've invented." And it was in a plain box with a very poor drawing on the front, and the name was Dungeons and Dragons.
It wasn't even the red box.
No, it was the white box. It was the brown box, the original brown box.
Some paper.
And then the white box came later. And we played it, and Steve and I became obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons. And John was not enthusiastic at all. And a year later, he left Games Workshop. But Steve and I said, let's pivot the whole of Workshop, which was going to try and just do wooden games and backgammon boards, into this role-playing games company. But we had no money. So we had £50, so we ordered 6 copies of Dungeons & Dragons, and on the back of that order we got the exclusive 3-year distribution agreement for the whole of Europe.
Bingo.
And
you wouldn't know at that time, but...
Oh, great! And so we started selling it mail order from our flats. Of course, we called the game company Games Workshop, and people thought it was a shop, so we'd see people wandering around on the street outside. We have to open the window. Up here, we're up here. Of course, there was no mobile phones about those days. We didn't even have a phone in our apartment, but there was a phone on the ground floor, which we shared with our landlord. And there would always be, the phone would ring, and it was a telephone order for Dungeons & Dragons. And he used to hang up on people. He just got so sick of it. And
he threw you out, I think.
We eventually had to
1
leave.
year later, he threw you out.
So we went, put all the stock we had into my girlfriend's flat. We went over to Gen Con in 1976 and signed up all the new games companies.
The last time I checked, the stock price at the London Exchange for Games Workshop PLC was £51, I think.
Yeah, but
it's...
But the value,
huge.
the market capital value of Games Workshop, and by the way, I have no shares anymore, is $1.5
you sold everything in
billion
1991?
Yeah, nearly €2 billion is the company's worth now.
€2
billion.
And you started all this.
And
if you had known, would you ever have left?
Well, we'll get to that.
All right.
The point is, we had nowhere to live. We go to the bank manager and in those days, trying to get funding for games was impossible. So you say, we've got a great game, it's a role-playing game, you're a hero, a wizard, you kill monsters, you find treasure. And he looks at you like
okay, let me just hand you over the cash.
He looks at you like a dog watching television. He had no understanding whatsoever. And so he said no. So we had no money. So we had to rent a very small office at the back of an estate agent. And we had to live and sleep in Steve's van for nearly 4 months. And so we joined a squash club, which we parked the van next to, for a shave and a shower in the mornings, and got really good at squash by default. And then into our little mail order business till like 1 or 2 in the morning, and back into the van. And eventually we had enough money to get an apartment, and then enough money to open our very first shop in 1978.
In Hammersmith.
In Hammersmith. But before that, we'd started White Dwarf magazine as well.
I went to Hammersmith once. So
in Dowling Road, really?
Yes, yeah, sure. It's part of the circuit if you're that age.
I went past it the other day. It's undergoing a huge change now.
Is there still a Games Workshop shop in it? No.
No, not for many, many, many years. But getting back to your point, am I sorry to have sold it? Well, listen, we've been running it for 17 years, from 75 to 91, and 16 years, whatever that is. And finding fancy game books were taking up a huge amount of time personally. So running Games Workshop during the day, trying to write books at night, having to go on tours around the world to promote the books because they were international bestsellers, and something had to give. So we appointed a managing director first, Brian Ansell, who ran it from the late 80s. And then he wanted to buy us out, and I think it was only right that we stepped aside. And we're just like proud parents now, looking at our baby grow up and become this amazing thing.
Is it difficult? Because I think that is something all of this business, all of the games business encounters one day or the other. Is it difficult to, on the one side, run a company, and on the other hand, be a creative person?
It's very difficult. There's very few people I know who can be both creative and have the ability to run businesses. quite involved with a number of video games companies these days, and I always I invest in them as well, for a partnership, an equal partnership with the creative director and the managing director, and they form this great bond. There's a lot of companies fail because the creative people tries to do everything, and they get to a point where they cannot do it anymore, but they don't want to let go.
But you're doing the tax revenue, you're doing
why should
accounting.
Be doing that? It's a waste of their time. They shouldn't be doing the jobs they can't do or shouldn't do. And otherwise, they have 100% of the company, but it's 100% of this, but rather than having 50% of that. So as long as they don't lose creative control, they should really partner with a really good business person to help scale the business and let them enjoy and do what they're good at.
When you left Games Workshop in the 90s, you changed company, and you went into the video game business.
Yeah. But before that,
did you become bored of board games? Did you say this is the future?
I thought it was the future. I'll never be bored of board games. I have over 1,000. Why am I here?
To buy some more, because there are new ones.
Well, I have
more than 1,500 new ones this year.
I have over 1,000 at home.
Yeah.
And I've just written a book about board games as well.
We'll come to that later.
So that's still my passion. But from seeing games moving into a different medium, I felt that was a very exciting opportunity to get into video games. And we were living in the digital age, and there's digital entertainment, but digital entertainment, video games, does not displace board games. They sit happily alongside and help grow the whole market for games, which is brilliant.
But everybody said in the 90s, when video games were growing and when they became visually something that was more than a text adventure on a Commodore, and graphically they evolved a lot to today. And each and every year there's someone asking me here, well, aren't video games the death of the board game? And it never happened.
Absolutely not.
On the contrary.
I think because whilst we live in a digital world, we run our lives through digital e-commerce, we buy through digital, and we play through digital. I think there's part in the human being that needs physical more than they realize. So there's been a revival in physical books, in vinyl records, and of course in board games. And board games has also had an explosion of interest because it's ironically in the digital age that's actually enabled board games to succeed. Crowdfunding. People are able to have an idea, pre-sell it to a market, and then make that game and be able to distribute it. In the old days, you had to go through the traditional distribution channels of building the game first at your own expense, going through distribution channel, trying to find retailers to stock it, having to market it. So it's a very difficult process. So those gatekeepers of distribution are now no longer required if you want to make your own game. So crowdfunding has been amazing to enable games to be made. Kickstarter in particular. Plus, you can obviously come to shows like this. Plus, you can read about all the reviews online from the many games websites. Plus, you can learn how to play online from all the tutorials on YouTube. So this kind of
there is an advantage to
and the
digitalization.
And the communities that are online as well. So the internet has enabled the video games, the board games market to really boom. And the innovation now that you see now is amazing. I mean, 200,000 people here at SPIEL Essen, 1,500 new games. Happy days.
Do you still have your gaming group?
Yeah, the same people are still in it since the 80s. I'm the secretary of the Games Nightclub. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek board games group. So Steve Jackson, co-founder of Games Workshop's in it. Peter Molyneux, who's a pretty famous video games developer in the UK.
He did Black and White.
Yeah, and Populous and Fable and all sorts of games. And also 3 other guys. One is the video games industry and 2 aren't. So we have I'm the secretary. After each game played, we have a point system, and I do a newsletter and really kind of give them a lot of grief in the newsletter. And at the end of the year, the winner gets the cup for the year, and then we have it engraved.
Fantastic. When we're talking about Kickstarter, we have to talk about these little gems here, which were funded on Kickstarter. They're done by Atlantis Miniatures.
Atlantis Miniatures, they're the official Fighting Fancy resin miniatures for...
So you were involved in the process of designing them? Or?
I was involved in the process of selecting them and deciding which ones should be done, and I got the original models made through an independent modeler called Damien Sparks, but Dan Jack of Atlantis has done all the hard work since.
Who's this guy?
That's a shape changer from the cover of Forest of Doom, one of my most popular Fighting Fantasy game books.
What's he do?
He sits on a log and looks like a very harmless little goblin, but as you approach, he metamorphoses into this rather gruesome, spiked lizard creature who's going to shred you and kind of eat your heart. Nothing.
If you're not skilled enough.
I mean, that's the thing about Fighting Fantasy game books. It gives you these choices, and people always seem to go for the bad choices. And so I love luring people to their doom, promising them all sorts of wonders, and yet hope they fall on poison spikes.
Death Trap Dungeon
yes,
comes to mind.
Yes, you spotted it. That's the Blood Beast, with its 2 real eyes and many not so real eyes, and living in this sort of stinking pool of acidic slime.
Best to be avoided.
Yeah, but most people end up, having a rather grim ending by encountering the Blood Beast.
Fighting Fantasy, the books, they taught you something about honesty towards yourself, not backtracking but starting from the beginning.
Yes, I used to see people on public transport and buses and trains with their hands in multiple places. The 5-fingered bookmark, as I used to call it. I don't mind if people cheat. I mean, it's just like peeking around the corner and thinking, I'll go the other way.
Are you aware of the game The Seventh Continent?
Yes.
sold for several millions on Kickstarter.
Yes.
It was a huge
I met
success.
those guys.
And you met those guys.
Yeah.
They made a huge dedication to you and Steve and to Joe Dever of Lone Wolf.
It's great what they've done, and they came to see me, and we discussed possibly about doing one around Fighting Fantasy, but clearly they've gone their own way with their own IP. But they sent me a copy, which is very kind of them. And
did you play it yet?
Great.
In the Games Club?
We haven't played in the Games Club because it's more of a solo adventure, but extraordinary piece of work.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it wouldn't fit on both of those tables.
How they did that, I will never know.
Well,
it's hard enough writing a Fighting Fantasy game book, the branching narrative. It's writing like a computer flow chart and keeping a record of all the choices that you can make, and making sure that there's no loops in there, or the economy is balanced, that the creatures aren't too difficult, that there's actually possible to get through, whilst having a narrative tale that's also enjoying and compelling.
Did you have a board or a wall with 400 post-its?
Not 400 post-its, no. I have 400 numbers ready, and then I create a flowchart. So it's one goes to 2 ways. So it goes to 27 and 53. I write down what happens at those and keep a record of the money you find and the things you find to make sure it's balanced, not too hard, not too difficult. So there's an awful lot of post-writing balancing, a bit like balancing a video game.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nightmare.
It's a nightmare. Why? Why is it a nightmare? It's a creative process.
It's a creative process. It's quite difficult to get it balanced.
Fighting Fantasy, the books, they were always a standalone story. One book, and then you were in a fantasy universe, but there was no connection towards the next book. Like I mentioned at Lone Wolf, where you evolved from one book to the next. Where you had a character progression.
There was 3 that was joined in a way, like Trial of Champions came after Death Trap Dungeon, and Armies of Death came after that. So there's a link there. And there's also a link of many of the characters that appear in some of the books. Like Lord Azor first appeared in City of Thieves, and now he popped up again in Port of Peril, and he's now a main character of Assassins of Valencia, my new book. And Steve, of course, wrote the Sorcery series, which was linked, and the epic Sorcery series. And Joe Diva, sadly, no longer with us. He used to work for us at Games Workshop, and he and Gary Chalk left to write Lone Wolf.
But Games Workshop, back in the days, they did the Lone Wolf miniatures.
No.
They did. There was a set, Lone Wolf miniatures.
Really?
They had Githyanki and all the stuff.
Githyanki is from Dungeons & Dragons. It's Fiend Folio.
Are they? But I'm aware that there is some Lone Wolf miniature.
Well,
because this is
maybe
it's part of the retro gaming that
Twitch show space sphere will know the answer to that. But
yes.
I don't recall that.
Prove me right, please. Prove me right.
No, we did Fighting Fantasy figures at Workshop. I don't remember doing Lone Wolf. Okay. But Gary Chalk did all the artwork on the original Talisman game, which we signed. And Joe Diva used to run our mail order department.
All right.
And they were going to do the book series for Workshop, but decided to leave and do it for themselves because they'd seen how well Fighting Fantasy had done. You can't blame people. In fact, lots of people who wrote Fighting Fantasy type books used to work for us at Workshop.
It's the creative cell. It's patient number zero. So if you're patient number zero and you have had a view on the British gaming industry all your life, what is becoming of it now?
We made a lot of it up as we went along.
Now that you're leaving someday or
I don't want to leave. Don't make me leave. It might not happen. You never know. If I presume you're talking about Brexit now.
We are. I want to hear your opinion on this.
The video games.
What impact will it have on
the video games industry? Voted 90% to remain in Europe. Disregarding the arguments that you hear, for the video games industry alone, we need unrestricted access to the European market through the single market. We need unrestricted access for free flow of data, especially with video games. We need unrestricted access to European talent. 25% of most game studios in the UK have overseas talent, of which the large percentage is EU talent. Because there's simply not enough software engineers, artists, and animators, and other high-skilled jobs in the UK. I mean, there's a great workforce in the UK, of course, but if you want to be the best in the world, you have to attract talent from all over the world. Now, having people from overseas work in studios does not displace British talent. I would say it helps build the studios, because if you have the best studios, you're going to get the best investment, and you're going to have the best projects to work on. It's like a football team. You always want the best talent from anywhere in the world. And same with video games companies and every industry I know. And from a cultural point of view, I think it's great that we stay as like a family unit. My mother was from Belgium. My father met her after the war. And I think there's a great commonality between Europeans, and I just don't like to see what I'd call the breakup of the family.
It's a board game community. And the board game business. It will be very difficult for British companies to sell games on the continent, because Germany is the largest market for board games in Europe.
I'm sure
Poland,
they'll find
France.
a way. They'll have to negotiate a way, but there's going to be more bureaucracy, pain that we don't have at the moment. So it's an unnecessary barrier, which I'm sure we'll overcome at some point. But when that'll happen, I don't know. But I just don't think it's a good thing, because of that feeling of there's never anything good come up from walls being built, I don't think. I think all borders should be open.
You wouldn't endorse Brexit the game?
Some people I know have done Brexit, the choose your own adventure style book.
Is it?
Yeah.
And where does it end? It runs in circles, probably.
Never ends. The never-ending saga.
There is another vote in the parliament.
Oh, well,
there was always another vote in parliament.
I mean, it's brought British politics into kind of effectively a bad place. People on both sides, whether you Remain or Brexit, have lost respect for that process now. It's gone on too long. There's been you feeling that the quality of the argument has dropped. That the people have become unprincipled in pursuit of what they're trying to do. So I think a lot of the old standards have really fallen in politics in the UK.
This is board gaming now, this is politics now. You've looked back at 8,000 years of gaming. I think you brought that book.
Yes, it's my other book I've written with James Wallace. This is called Board Games in 100 Moves. It's a chronological history of board games, beautifully illustrated by Dorling Kindersley, who just put incredible production values in these books. So it's
where do we start?
Where do we start? You start really 5,000 years ago when Tutankhamun used to play the game called Senet. He had 4 sets of Senet interred with him, which were found when it was opened last century. And we talk about all the games that have been milestones in gaming history. Of course, Dungeons & Dragons, Monopoly. Not all the games I like, but games that have had significant impact on the world. And we talk about the people behind them. For example, the way Twister was about to be pulled by Milton Bradley until it was played by Johnny Carson and Eva Gabor on his show. And Milton Bradley have actually told him to withdraw the game, but he appeared that evening on the show and sold out overnight as Eva Gabor was writhing around the floor with Johnny Carson. And it sold out, and they had to print millions to keep up with the demand.
It's all about marketing.
It's all about opportunities and marketing. So we talk about kind of the human the humanity behind some of the games, the inventors, and try and give kind of good anecdotes to amuse people. Some of the good stories and some of the sad stories, people who didn't make any money. We talk about, Monopoly. Charles Darrow's Monopoly was really based on Elizabeth Maggie's Landlord's Game, which she made no money out of. And yet he'd seen a copy and made his own copy, which he called Monopoly, and then that was licensed to Parker Brothers, and we made millions out of that. But without the Landlord's Game from Elizabeth Maggie, he would have never created Monopoly. So we talk about some of the tragic tales, some of the great tales. I mean, they're showing the
We're in it. We're in it too.
You're in it too. Yes.
Yeah, Internationale Spieltage.
Yeah, we give all the winners of the
Deutsche Spielepreis
is listed in the back somewhere. I don't know who's won 2019, but there we are. Spiel des Jahres winners.
Goes on to Azul. Yes. How has it changed over the years? I think there's a rapid evolvement in the last maybe 10 or 5 years, but how has it changed since when you played your first game?
I think games have got better over time. I mean, in Victorian times, they were all roll the dice, move a piece around the board, end of story. And every game was the same, pretty boring. And then Elizabeth Maggie, who I just talked about, she came up with a system where something could actually happen on the square you land. Mm-hmm. You could buy or rent property, and that gave a whole completely new dynamic. And then we've seen over time, games have come up with new mechanics that have improved the interactivity, the strategy component. So therefore luck goes down and strategy goes up. And we've seen some huge milestones in games, as I said, and some huge successes like Ticket to Ride and Catan and Carcassonne and others. And we're seeing that elegant game systems where there's some great choice to be made that people can learn very quickly have really succeeded. There's a tendency to overcomplicate games now. I mean, I've just bought several games this morning, But I don't go for what I call the brain ache games anymore. You've got to do this, to do that, to do this, to do this, to do this. And they think, God, this is like being at work.
It's engine building.
Yeah, and this is too much like spreadsheet manager.
All right.
So I look for games that allow me to have a lot of interaction with my fellows, negotiation, backstabbing, bit of luck as well, because we all like a bit of luck.
Does it have to be balanced for you, or does it?
I like to think that if I make the right decisions, I'll win.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll accept that a bit of luck can prejudice that. So, the games I like are games like Seven Wonders and Ticket to Ride as well, and not too heavy, but not much, not kind of total luck games.
Yep.
And of course, my tastes have changed over time. I used to play Die Macher and all the big games of the time, but I'm nearly 70 years old and my brain is shrinking, and we can only play what we're able to play.
Yeah,
so
but
games
you do have
memory,
the time now.
Dexterity, forget it.
No meeple circus or something like that, and putting things on things.
No.
Do you still paint miniatures?
No, I was never able to paint. I was always rubbish at painting. I mean, I can write books, interactive books, and I can design board games, but I can't paint.
What did you buy then today? You have been. You told me you have been away from Essen 20 years?
It's about that, probably.
It's your first time?
I launched 2 games here, kind of wearing my individual hat. One in 1990, one in 1991. Boomtown, which was a very popular game, and a game called Automania. In fact, I brought a couple of games here still in their original shrink wrap. They're going to be available on the Atlantis stand to somebody.
And yes.
But it's grown extraordinary. I mean, I can't believe it. I
Well,
mean, it's the difficulty, where do I start?
It has doubled up the last 5 years.
Yeah.
I think there has been there is a momentum to the board game industry, to people who like to, as you said, like to be on Kickstarter and have their game produced, and companies do produce more games.
What worries me, there could be some great games here that we'll never know about. Hopefully there's enough people who play them all to say, this is a diamond no one found until right now.
Would you have to have a board game museum?
I'd love to have a board games museum.
A constant institution, not an exhibition like in the Victoria.
Well, in the
Albert.
UK we've got a national video games museum.
Yeah, but
now.
it's video games, and you have to.
No,
the video game museum.
It'd be nice to have somewhere part of that being a board games museum. I think they should. The two industries. There's no harm in them coexisting. It's not either or. It should be both. The way that YouTube is not a threat to Hollywood, or there's different visual media that happily come together. And I mean, also you're seeing board games made of video games and video games made of board games now.
It's coming back.
There is already a crossover.
Like Minecraft this year, which has become a board game, or Big Cities, which has been a computer game. And I think that the board game
Steamforge made Dark Souls board game based on the video game, and you can see now video games conversions of Ticket to Ride and other Carcassonne you can play on your iPad. So there is it's a convergence now, which is good.
Do you like hybrid games where you have an app?
No,
or
not at all.
Why? It's either or you don't want to have a screen on the board games table?
I don't. Do you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I might like is augmented reality, to see an animation of some of the components.
I do like the atmosphere of Mansions of Madness, for example, where you have a board and you discover things, but you have the screen to interact and to give you some ambient sound, and
I just like the fun created by the people themselves. I don't need any third-party input, really. We like to go for it head-to-head.
All right.
We don't need any trickery from the iPhone.
But I think that smartphone gaming or video gaming,
Oh, well, that's different.
that has put a higher acceptance to board gaming because everybody's used to game.
Yeah.
They are used to play on the tramway and the bus, and then they go home.
Games are in danger of becoming socially acceptable. We were no longer the geek.
No,
that's going to be the
no.
T-shirt.
The geek is the norm.
Yeah, geek is chic.
You brought these. These are pre-releases from a
They
Kickstarter.
were done especially for Finding Fancy Fest. We had a day in London.
We may hold them up for the camera.
Yeah. We had a day in London in August celebrating Finding Fancy gamebooks, and Atlantis Miniatures did some pre-Kickstarter releases, exclusive for the day. So there's not many of these left.
All right. And they were funded in like 1 hour on Kickstarter.
Oh yeah,
it's amazing,
less than,
isn't
less
it?
Than.
Yeah.
I mean, they are quite beautiful what he's done.
We have another.
Yeah, this is part of the range. Yeah.
Azur.
He's the bad guy. He's on it's his assassins and assassins of Valencia. They're all tied up together.
What did you buy today? You have early access to the halls, and we want to see Ian Livingstone's loot.
As I said, I haven't bought my heavy games yet. I'm waiting for some recommendations first. So I bought games that seem quite light and good for kind of end of evening stuff for our games group and something. So
the German word would be Absacker.
Absacker. So I bought
yes,
Little Town.
Yes, I've seen that, and I love the concept.
It looks quite interesting.
What did you play? Did you play it, or did you just
I haven't played
grab it?
This is me running around the first hour this morning before the doors open. I bought Sea of Clouds. I mean, don't know anything about that.
A lovely artwork it is.
Topiary. That's kind of about our level now. Looks like a kid's game, but I think it's more than that. So I'm told it's very interesting mechanic.
All right.
What else did I buy? I bought 3 games that really go into the end of evening. Or old people's home like us. There's Karuba the card game. We like Karuba the board game.
When does your game night stop? At what hour? What time?
About midnight.
At midnight.
Yeah.
But it's not...
Here we go with Würfel König.
It's
Dice King.
Dice King.
See, I can speak. Ich kann ein bisschen Deutsch sprechen.
Fantastic.
Würfel König. And then keeping in the Würfel, we've got Wurf und Weg.
Just throw it. Roll your dice. Roll in the way.
And then we got Arboretum.
That is
a card game.
The card game. Arboretum, the card game.
And which is the last one I got is High Risk, a dice rolling game about climbing a mountain.
And if you compare all these boxes, all these.
So as you see, none of them are the big games yet.
No, it's okay. Well, there's
that'll be
nothing
tomorrow
bad in.
When I've found out more, when I talk to my people.
Oh, you have scouts. You have scouts running around.
Well, maybe they can through Twitter. Yeah, send me a tweet. It's at Ian_Livingstone. Which games I should buy? That'd be brilliant.
The heavyweights.
Yeah.
Which heavyweight?
Remember, I'm old. Go easy on me.
Not too difficult. When you look at all those games, especially like the trees in Arboretum or Sea of Clouds, which is a pirates game. And you look at the artwork of the first Dungeons and Dragons box from late 70s. Isn't it stunning how the artwork alone has evolved?
The artwork has evolved hugely, and I think artwork is really key. My most famous Final Fantasy game books had incredible artists on it. One in particular, Ian McCaig, who did the cover of Forest of Doom, Death Trap Dungeon, City of Thieves, and Island of the League as a King. He was amazing. And he went on to create Darth Maul for George Lucas. So, and you can see the similarity between the guy in the front of City of Thieves, Zambar Bone, and Darth Maul. They both got the kind of spiked cranium. But they were very, very influential in attracting people to them. It's ironic because Puffin, Penguin Books, because they were children's books, wanted to have very safe covers. They suggested a little gnome sitting on a toadstool and butterflies. And we said, no, we want covers that threaten to rip the faces off the readers. And using our Games Workshop artists.
I was...
we won that argument, I'm delighted to say.
Well, there's some gruesome things in here, and show up that...
But the thing about fighting fantasy and books is that, these books stimulate the imagination, whereas video games stimulate the senses. So I think that's where the difference is between, interactive fiction and interactive video games.
I just read on our stream, someone said that video games are like a dream you can walk into and do whatever you want. And you have control about what is happening in the dream.
But the video games is a broad church of content now, from app games and with very simplistic artwork and graphics up to these huge Hollywood productions like Grand Theft Auto and Red Redemption. It's like you're almost living in a cinematic experience. But there's something for everybody in video games. And I spend a lot of time defending video games because they're always being talked about negatively. People never talk about the positives. And I say, well, just park your prejudice against one or two titles and think cognitively what's happening when you're playing a video game and a board game is that you're problem solving, puzzle solving. You're learning intuitively. You're not punished for making a mistake. You can fail in a safe environment. In fact, you're encouraged to try again. It's not a binary decision like in an examination at school. You got it right, therefore you're able. You got it wrong, or you're less able. Everyone can become a winner over time in playing a game. And games enable creativity, like Minecraft you mentioned. Building these wonderful 3D architectural worlds, sharing them with your friends. I mean, who wouldn't want to become an architect after playing Minecraft? And the simulations like Roller Coaster Tycoon, where you're learning the physics of building the rides, the economy of staffing it and pricing the rides. And if you do it right, then the people will come. If you do it wrong, you play with the parameters until you win. So I think games are hugely great learning tool. And our Fighting Fantasy game books were proven later, after lots of criticism, to increase literacy levels by nearly 20%.
There you go.
Encourage creative writing, great for reluctant readers, great for algorithmic thinking, great for critical thinking. So that interactivity is taking control and is empowering. And that's why board games, video games, interactive books, I think, are so important for learning.
In 8,000 years of human history.
All told in one great book. Board games in 100 moves.
Fantastic. So what are your plans for the next day? You have signing sessions at Atlantis Miniatures.
Atlantis Miniatures, yeah.
What booth is that? It's
yes, that's in Hall 6.
I think it's K121. 6K121.
Thank you very much. See, I told you I was old. I can't remember anything.
All right.
Yeah, so I'll be signing books there and promoting the new miniatures and spending a lot of time buying games. And hopefully you might be able to recommend some of the bigger games. Some of those brain-aching games I can't wait to fail at.
Do you have a big win to get them home?
No, I flew here.
All right.
I'll take a few back. But,
extra luggage.
But Dan Jack from Atlantis has got a van and he'll ship them back from me.
They'll be hauling it to you. Do you have
our games night's on Tuesday, so Steve and Peter are all very excited about what I'm going to be bringing back.
Do you have a dedicated games room in your house?
I do.
With a shelf?
Yeah, 1,000 games.
Shelf.
3 Lara Crofts and 1,000 games.
Okay, thank you so much, Ian.
My
thank
pleasure.
you for sharing with us.
Thanks very much.
Thank
I really
you.
enjoyed it.
Goodbye. Thank you.